Hello. Welcome to my ethics seminar. The following video is based on the actual practices of a state board of psychologist examiners, sometimes called a board of psychology. The content is real, and it is based on interviews with psychologists, attorneys and former board members. I am a psychologist and I have a law degree. I created this video as a means to provide education to students in psychology programs. And if you find yourself laughing during the video, it is because reality is sometimes funny. But I can assure you it is not funny for a psychologist to go through the process you are about to learn about. Some of the content is surprising and shocking. But reality is like that too. Following this video, I will outline several important issues and ask you to reflect on several questions. I hope you learned something. And I hope you enjoy this video.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the Board of Psychologist Examiners. How can I help you?
My name is John Friendly. I called and I was given an appointment to speak with a Dr. Rear End. I have some questions.
What is this regarding?
I'm a psychologist and I have a law degree. I am developing a training for students, psychologists and attorneys.
I am Dr. Reed End, and I am a board member. I would be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you.
What do you want to know?
I want to understand how the board investigates a psychologist and how the process works.
Sure. I am a senior board member. What is on your mind?
Well, first of all, who can file a complaint against a psychologist?
Anyone can file a complaint against a psychologist. It does not have to be a patient.
Who generally files complaints?
Some are filed by patients. Others are filed by people who disagree with the psychologist, or are angry, or have a conflict with the psychologist's patient. Sometimes a family member or spouse will file a complaint because they do not like what you are reportedly doing with your patient.
What are the situations that carry a high risk for a complaint?
Working with anyone going through a divorce. Working with children during a divorce. Working with a family that is conflicted. Child custody evaluations. Working with people who have personality disorders. Suicidal people. Angry people. Patients who use drug and alcohol. Testifying in court. Writing letters to attorneys. Talking to attorneys. Leaving your office. Working as a small community.
Wow. That is a lot.
I suppose the only place you are safe is on a deserted island.
Okay, how does someone go about filing a complaint against a psychologist?
There are several ways. One is to go to our board's website and download and fill out our complaint forms. You can also download a copy of the Ethical Principles and Code of Conduct. You can also contact the board and we can mail the information.
Okay, let's imagine I want to file a complaint. For what reasons can I file a complaint?
There are 3 reasons to file a complaint. First, you can file a complaint if you believe a psychologist violated the ethical principle and code of conduct published by the American Psychological Association. You can also file a complaint if the psychologist violated a standard of care. Another reason would be that you believe a psychologist has acted unprofessionally.
How does the board define a standard of care?
That question does not have a simple answer. The board does not define the standard of care. Practices in psychology and the law define the standard of care. The board decides what we believe the standard of care might be in a given case.
So is the standard of care clear in all cases?
No.
This sounds like it can be subjective. How does the board know what the standard of care might be if they do not define the standards?
In most cases we consider what we believe would be the usual, customary, and even ordinary care that would be expected from a psychologist providing services to a certain population of patients in a given community.
So is it based on your opinion?
Yes. Somewhat.
Is there a reference or book where a psychologist can look up the standard of care for a given situation?
Unfortunately, no. The standards of care is usually reflected in our ethical principles, the law, a code of conduct, and the psychologist's training. But the standard of care is really defined by how psychologists actually practice in their state and community. The more universal standards that all psychologists must follow are related to basic issues like confidentiality, protected health information, privacy, multiple relationships, conflicts of interest, and competence. But there is another interesting thing you might want to know about.
What is that?
The code of conduct and various standards of care often conflict with each other, and there is often no right standard or principle to follow. The more unique the situation, the more a psychologist must use their judgment. Not all psychologists practice the same way, so it is hard to define a standard of care for an infrequent event for which there has been no published standard or training on the matter.
Do psychologists always agree on the standard of care?
No, they do not always agree. Even in medicine, physicians don't agree, and treatment can vary a great deal between physicians and hospitals.
So are the psychologists who disagree with other psychologists potentially unethical or guilty of unethical behavior?
I don't understand.
Okay. Could a psychologist who gives the wrong advice or disagrees be considered unethical?
I think I see your point. A psychologist might actually give advice that could turn out to be unethical. But the psychologist who follows the advice is responsible. The advice might be unprofessional.
So you agree that psychologists don't always agree and they will make mistakes? That they can always know the right thing to do?
Yes. Psychologists will make mistakes. But the board is here to hold psychologists accountable.
So, does the board consider it unethical to make an honest mistake that caused no significant harm? The board expects a psychologist to act ethically and professionally. Does the board expect a psychologist to know what to do in every situation?
We expect them to act ethically and professionally.
Okay. So, psychologists will make mistakes and they will be held accountable. How then can these principles, standards and codes conflict with each other?
There are many ways. For example, a psychologist has a broad duty to take reasonable steps when treating or supporting a patient. They must provide competent services. They must also take reasonable steps to protect their patient's life and well-being. At the same time, a psychologist must also take reasonable steps to not cause harm to others. In some cases, a psychologist must take steps to protect other people from harm. There are situations where a psychologist may be required to risk harming their patient, and yet they must minimize the harm to their patient and others. They should also avoid a multiple relationship. They should avoid a conflict of interest.
That sounds like a balancing act. Or maybe a situation where a psychologist is going to fail, or hurt someone, or upset someone no matter what they do. What does a psychologist do when they don't know what to do? Or, they are faced with a rare situation they have never encountered and there is no clear standard, principle, law or training available on the issue.
They should consult with qualified psychologist, and maybe even an attorney?
Sure. But what if they don't have time to consult? Or qualified people are not available? What if other people don't know what to do?
That is when psychologists can get into trouble. They can end up facing a situation where they are not competent or qualified. The psychologist should act professionally and responsibly. They should not neglect their patients. and they should not cause harm to their patient or cause harm to others.
That sounds like it could be impossible in some cases. I get the feeling that the board may hold psychologists to standards and principles that are not well defined. In my practice, there are many situations where there are no generally accepted principles or standards. I mean, there are times when you need to act but you can't know what is best until you know more. I mean, we can't anticipate every possible issue, potential problem, or outcome.
Psychologists are held to a very high standard. We expect more from a psychologist than other boards do from counselors, social workers, psychiatric nurse practitioners, and psychiatrists. Well, to be honest, those professions have fewer ethical requirements and a lot more freedom. Most of the time, the standards for other professions are associated with gross mistakes and negligence that resulted in significant harm.
This is interesting to me. You are saying that the principles and standards of care are different between all the professions.
Yes, they are very different. Counselors and social workers, and especially a nurse practitioner, can do many things that would be unethical for a psychologist.
Really? Like what?
They can offer more direct advice, give their opinions, and make recommendations to help their patients. They can step into the middle of a conflict between family members and even couples during a divorce. And they can do that with little risk of violating an ethical principle and being found guilty. They can treat a couple who are in a divorce and child custody conflict. They can talk to attorneys and make recommendations without using independent experts. Some can testify about people they have never met. They can take almost any action if their actions are reasonable and did not result in significant harm. A psychiatric nurse practitioner can offer family therapy without training or education in the family therapy. Other professionals are judged primarily on the basis of whether or not they were grossly negligent or caused significant harm. In medicine, violating confidentiality and forcing a patient into treatment with you without a court order is not unethical. Nurse practitioners can have multiple relationships with people and legal conflicts that a psychologist can't.
Isn't it true that these other professionals provide many of the same services?
Yes, that is definitely true.
So patients will encounter big differences in professional behavior depending on who they see.
Yes, it is all over the map. A counselor can work with children and do things that are unethical for a psychologist to do.
So are all these other professions acting unethically and unprofessionally?
Yes. I mean no. Well, no.
Do these different standards of care create problems?
What do you mean?
It seems to me that psychologists would be afraid to do anything when they don't know what to do, or when their code and standards conflict with each other. It means that other professionals are more free to use their judgment. You know, in my experience, counselors and other professionals are less afraid to do what they believe is right. They are more willing to advocate and protect their patients in difficult situations. I suspect the level of restriction on a psychologist's behavior may have an unexpected impact on the care and support that patients receive.
What do you mean?
Well, why see a psychologist if you can see a social worker? Social workers can advocate more and be more supportive to their patients. Psychologists are worried more about other people than their patients. Compared to other professions, I mean.